travel alert over a mosquito-borne virus. Pregnant women warn not to travel to affected areas. An armed standoff in Oregon turns deadly. What happens when police try to arrest the leaders? Road to the White House, the complex relationship between faith and politics. And support for Christians in the Middle East, how the church is addressing their suffering. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 27th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Health authorities now confirm the feared Zika virus has hit the U.S. At least 2 cases have been reported. That number could rise by the end of the week. Wyatt Goolsby reports.
The fight is on against the Zika virus that health officials suspect is linked to a wave of birth defects in Latin America. Yellow fever mosquitoes carry the disease. The World Health Organization is calling the spread of Zika a humanitarian emergency. Colombia has launched a campaign to try and stop the virus. The projected number of cases this year, 600,000. Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff saying South American leaders are all worried about the virus and that they are working quickly to create a vaccine. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is advising pregnant women to reconsider traveling to Brazil and 21 other countries and territories with Zika outbreaks. Several American and British airlines are offering refunds to travelers. In the U.S., 1 case is reported in Arkansas and another in Virginia. Neither is life-threatening. Officials in El Salvador, Colombia, and Brazil are encouraging women to delay pregnancy until the crisis has passed. Melissa Muscella at the Catholic University of America says there is an ethical question here.
It's one thing for the government to warn people about the risks, but then they need to assess on their own whether that risk is a good enough reason to delay pregnancy or not. The government here is then implying that these couples have a kind of obligation, that it would be irresponsible for them to fail to use contraception, and that's misleading.
Muscella also says those children born with a birth defect are still valuable in the sight of God, regardless of the circumstances.
President Obama is calling for urgent action to curb the spread of the virus. That includes a push for more tests and possible treatments. Brian?
Is this a new virus, Wyatt?
No, there have been outbreaks in other continents, places like Africa, Asia, parts of the Pacific, but this is really the first time Americans are learning more about this.
Well, let's learn more about the Zika virus. The CDC says only 1 in 5 people infected with Zika actually get sick. Most of the cases are mild. Symptoms include fever, rash, joint pain, and red eyes. To protect against infection, you need to avoid mosquitoes in the countries where the virus is spreading. That species is not found here in the U.S. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. An armed standoff in Oregon may be near an end tonight. Police shot and killed one of the leaders last night, arresting 8 others. They've now surrounded those who remain.
Honestly, there are things more important than your life, and freedom is one of them.
Oregon protester Lavoy Finicum telling NBC News he would rather die than be arrested. Tuesday night, Finicum was killed. This as authorities arrested protest leader Ammon Bundy and several members of the armed group that occupied the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Officials say it started with a traffic stop and that Finicum and Bundy's brother Ryan refused to surrender. The Bundy Ranch claims on Facebook that Finicum had his hands up and was shot 3 times. Officials aren't commenting much beyond saying it's not clear who fired first. Ryan Bundy suffered minor injuries. Finicum died at the scene. He had been one of the most outspoken members of the armed group. That group took over the refuge earlier this month, protesting federal land policies.
Hello, America. This is Lavoy Finicum. We are not going anywhere. We're here to do a job.
Tuesday's incident ended with Ammon and Ryan Bundy and 3 followers in federal custody on felony conspiracy charges. 3 other activists were arrested separately. The suspects each face a charge of conspiracy to impede officers through the use of force, intimidation, or threats. Well, Bernie Sanders wants to be president, and today the Vermont Democrat got a chance to visit the White House. Our chief White House correspondent and political director, Lauren Ashburn, is there tonight. Lauren?
Brian, Bernie Sanders says that he and the president talked about the economy, foreign policy, and a little bit of politics in their 45-minute meeting. It was the first extended conversation at the White House since Sanders' unexpectedly strong challenge to Hillary Clinton for the Democratic presidential nomination. President Obama hasn't publicly taken sides and may not. But in a recent interview, he says Clinton would be ready to go on day one while suggesting Sanders needs more scrutiny. Talking to reporters after today's meeting, Sanders told us he and the president have had differences.
But by and large, over the last 7 years on major issue after major issue, I have stood by his side where he has taken on unprecedented Republican obstructionism and has tried to do the right thing for the American people.
The White House said after the meeting that President Obama believes that Sanders' bid is good for the Democrats because he can, quote, engage and inspire them. Sanders fully supports abortion and said at this week's Democratic town hall he wants to increase funding to Planned Parenthood. Sanders says he didn't ask the president directly for his endorsement. They did talk about the warming relations with Iran and ISIS. At the White House, I'm Lauren Ashburn, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Lauren. And complaining of unfair treatment by Fox News, Donald Trump plans to skip the last Republican debate before Iowa tomorrow night. He singles out moderator Megyn Kelly, saying she is biased against him. Fox News stands by Kelly. She says Trump doesn't get to control the media. Trump's main opponent, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, and his campaign have been taking shots at Trump all day today on social media. A new study confirms most Americans want a president with strong religious conviction. The Pew study says Ben Carson is considered the most religious among the presidential candidates. He is followed by Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders. At the bottom of the list, Donald Trump. The Pew study also says being Catholic is considered an asset. 16% of voters say they're more likely to vote for a Catholic candidate. 75% say it doesn't matter. J.C. Derrick is Washington bureau chief for World Magazine. Sarah Westwood, investigative reporter with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us both tonight. So, Liberty University's president, Jerry Falwell Jr., endorses Trump. Why is the alumni so upset with that endorsement?
Well, this was a personal endorsement, so Jerry Falwell Jr. made it in his own personal capacity, not as president of Liberty University. However, the only reason he is well known is because of his father and his association with the university. So many of the alumni feel that they're being misrepresented by everyone saying, oh, Liberty represents or is associated with Donald Trump. And several alumni told me that if you were to take a straw poll of either current students or alumni, that Donald Trump wouldn't finish in the top 5.
Well, Republicans are clearly going after the Christian vote, specifically the evangelical vote. Why is that so important, Sarah?
It's so important because it makes up 60% of the Republican electorate in Iowa. And if you win in Iowa, then you're launched on momentum that's hard to stop. After New Hampshire, you have South Carolina, you have the southern states with similar makeup of Christian voters. Ted Cruz has rightly recognized that, and so have some of the other candidates. I mean, that's how Rick Santorum won in 2012. They know that a win in Iowa is crucial to maintaining viability in the campaign.
Well, Falwell had Trump speak at Liberty on Martin Luther King Day, but this seems like a really risky step. Why would he give his endorsement this early in the race?
Well, he says it's because of Trump's business experience. You know, he believes that the country is in dire straits financially. Obviously, we have huge debt, huge fiscal problems that have not been addressed by president after president, Congress after Congress. And so he said he believes that a citizen executive is what's needed. And in fairness, Liberty actually has some experience with that for almost 4 decades. They were in a lot of debt, barely made it through. And so he believes that a turnaround agent is what Donald Trump would be for the country.
Several of the candidates are Catholic. Do either of you see the Catholics and evangelicals banding together here to support a candidate?
It's entirely possible, but the thing that is puzzling a lot of observers is that, like you said earlier, Donald Trump is not seen as a very religious candidate. He's actually at the bottom, and yet evangelical voters are flocking to him for some reason. It shows that perhaps some voters are putting aside these nuances of religion, and they're really just angry about the status quo in Washington. Is
the Cruz campaign really zeroing in on this strategy of attracting evangelicals?
Absolutely. This is why you've seen him frame his campaign the way he has. He's brought up scripture on the campaign more than any other candidate. He's really, from the beginning, tried to sell himself as this evangelical choice for these voters.
When Trump brought up scripture, at Liberty on Martin Luther King Day.
2 Corinthians.
2 Corinthians. So Cruz is saying, 2 Corinthians walk into a bar. That's his line. It's going to be an interesting debate. We appreciate the insight both of you brought tonight. JC, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, one of North Korea's only allies agrees with the United States. North Korea should not have nuclear weapons. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in China discussing the growing threat.
Kim Jong-un's actions are reckless and they are dangerous.
Kerry says it doesn't matter if North Korea successfully tested a hydrogen bomb. What matters is that they're trying to test it. He calls it a clear violation of international sanctions. Well, in Rome and Geneva, church leaders address persistent persecution of Christians in the Middle East. Our Rome producer, Mary Shovlain, joining us from just outside the Vatican. Mary, describe the support from the church on two fronts for persecuted Christians in the Middle East.
Brian, Pope Francis, during his weekly general audience today, reminded the Arab-speaking pilgrims that God does not remain silent in the face of cries and pleas from his people. He doesn't remain silent in the face of injustice and persecution. And he asked that God protect them from the evil one. In Geneva, we have the Holy See's representative to the United Nations speaking at the Security Council open meeting. And he said there are two issues worrying the Holy See right now: the situation between Israel and Palestine and the situation in Syria, speaking about the deplorable acts that have taken place against civilians there and also in Iraq.
Of course, the Pope met with the president of Iran this week, urging him to be a peacemaker in that region. Is the church itself really emerging as a major player in the global peace effort?
Well, we just have to think back to the year 2014, even, when he invited the Israeli and the Palestinian presidents here to the Vatican for prayer in the Vatican Garden, something that had never been done before. Never have two conflicting world leaders met for prayer here in the Vatican. And so we know the great fruit that was able to bring. And who can forget the prayer vigil Pope Francis called for in St. Peter's Square for Syria, that it seemed to stave off possible air attacks by the United States the following week. So Pope Francis is respected at all levels by, it seems, all world leaders, and he's in a unique position to bring about true change, true fruitful peace throughout the world.
Mary Shovlain from Rome. Mary, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And the Franciscan caretakers of the holy sites in the Holy Land say Christians now make up only 1.5% of the total population, and life is tough for them.
And like all the minorities, there are a lot of difficulties. Problem of identity in Palestinian Authority, economical problems, social problems, and all kinds of problems, but nothing if you confront this with what the Christians are living in Syria and Iraq.
The Franciscans have been present in the Holy Land since the 13th century. Coming up, more fallout from the undercover Planned Parenthood videos. Pro-life advocates discuss the charges against David Daleiden. And protecting prayer, why limits are placed on competing Christian football teams. During today's general audience, Pope Francis recalls the Old Testament story of Joseph and his brothers. He calls it an example of grace and reconciliation. Francis sees this Jubilee Year of Mercy as an opportunity to reconcile with our family members. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Pro-life leaders say the man behind the undercover Planned Parenthood video is facing criminal charges because of politics. Tonight, Catherine Szeltner has more on the district attorney behind the indictment.
Planned Parenthood says its vindication. Pro-life activists David Daleiden and Sandra Merritt are facing felony charges for making this video. But the president of Americans United for Life says not so fast.
They were taking a victory lap in the media yesterday, and it's really premature for that. Planned Parenthood is far from being exonerated. There is still so much evidence to be explored in terms of their wrongdoing and the potential felonies that are demonstrated on the videotapes.
Charmaine Yost wasn't surprised by the indictment because of Texas politics. The district attorney behind the charge is Devin Anderson.
Leading by example, Devin Anderson.
She was appointed by former Governor Rick Perry, but has surprised pro-lifers before. In 2013, a grand jury under her watch cleared a doctor accused of performing late-term abortions. Pro-life activist Troy Newman led that accusation and also sits on the board of Daleiden's group. Before Daleiden created Center for Medical Progress, he worked with Lila Rose in her undercover investigations at Live Action.
I think it's insane that this has happened, that this indictment has even happened against two very good and noble people who are trying to expose the truth of what's happening in Texas.
Rose says her former colleague is a brave investigative reporter.
Investigative journalists who are working hard to comply with any relevant laws and who are working hard to do something that sometimes is very difficult, like going behind the scenes at abortion facilities and exposing the back room where they're selling body parts.
Because this is the same grand jury that's cleared an abortion doctor, Lila Rose says she has a lot of concerns about Harris County. She believes the indictment is a politically motivated move instead of the county actually addressing Planned Parenthood's abuses. Brian?
More will be revealed. Thank you, Catherine. And the attorney for a Christian high school in Florida demands an apology from the Florida High School Athletic Association. Cambridge Christian was playing another Christian high school in the 2015 state football championship game. Now, both these schools have a tradition of prayer before the game, so Cambridge asked the Athletic Association for permission to offer a pregame prayer over the loudspeaker. The request was denied.
This is a case of the state dictating to a church when it can and cannot pray. And that's what's so egregious here, is that the argument now is that two Christian schools can't pray before a football game.
The school's attorney tells us the fans gathered together in protest before kickoff, praying the Lord's Prayer together. A federal appeals court is set to decide if commissioners in a North Carolina county can open their meetings with prayer. The American Civil Liberties Union sued the Rowan County Commission in 2013. 3 people claim the practice of starting meetings with Christian prayer is coercive and discriminatory. A federal court sided with the ACLU in May, sending that case to the appeals court. Up next, a Holocaust survivor shares her story. She explains how she tried to flee from the Nazis. And an unusual sight at the Vatican. The circus comes to town. Wow, another tough day on Wall Street. Everybody with a retirement account watching this. The Dow tumbled another 222 points. The NASDAQ off 100 points. The Federal Reserve cites global economic troubles. It is leaving interest rates unchanged for now. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening, January 27th. I'm Brian Patrick. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. It coincides with the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. The Nazis killed more than 1 million people at that concentration camp, most of them Jews. Now, more than 70 years later, anti-Semitism persists. Arthur Berger is a senior advisor for international programs at the Holocaust Memorial Museum here in D.C. So it's been more than 70 years since Auschwitz was liberated. Have we seen progress in this area, and where do we need to see more?
Well, we've seen tremendous progress. It's a mixed bag, really, of results. The tremendous progress is that we have not just the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, and we get almost 2 million visitors a year, and about 30 million on our website, but there are hundreds of Holocaust museums around the world. And you take Germany, the center of Nazism, today has so many sites to teach people, visitors, Germans, young people. Today, the ambassador from Germany talked about the kind of education program that they have for all German youngsters. This is such a powerful thing. There's a group of 31 nations, it's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, that get together twice a year and share this network to try to help them teach their children. You know, if you teach a generation, the next generation will know a little bit better. But all that said, we still have a lot of progress to do. We have problems. And one of the big problems is the increase in hostile information, of denial of the Holocaust, of anti-Semitism on the internet. I mean, it's easy, especially in the United States. Anybody who wants to can set up a website and put things on there.
So someone with a hate message can really get it out.
Unfortunately, that is the case. And 6 years ago, at the Holocaust Museum right here in Washington, you may remember this, Brian, an 88-year-old man who was consumed by hate. He hated Jews, he hated blacks. He came to the front of the museum and he murdered one of our security officers.
Incredible. So this dissemination of information, hate literature, things like that, is that what's feeding an apparent rise in anti-Semitism in Europe now?
That's only part of the reason. Part of the reason also goes to the extremists that have this nationalistic message. You know, whenever there's a problem in the economy in any country, you tend to, see an increase in extremism and extremist ideas. The far right, the far left, they somehow come together. And in Europe, which has always had a history of anti-Semitism, it's just beneath the surface. So you have this coming up on websites, on extremist parties in Greece, in Poland, in Hungary. You don't have that in Germany because the education system is so strong.
Pope Francis recently visited the main synagogue in Rome. Is interfaith dialogue crucial to really addressing this and cutting it off?
And what Pope Francis has done is wonderful. And he has built upon his predecessors who've reached out to the Jewish community. The last 50 years, we've had this interfaith dialogue that is powerful, that really gets to the root causes of Christian anti-Semitism and tries to deal with it in a very positive way. I mean, the Pope going to the main synagogue in Rome, and I've been to that synagogue, and it's such a powerful place. It's in where the former ghetto was. He tells them, you're my brothers. I mean, this is a powerful message. He's not saying you're less than we are as Catholics. He's saying we have to work together to try to improve the world. And that's what we really need to do.
Well, I want to remember my own grandmother, who may have died at Auschwitz or some other concentration camp. She got as far as Holland in escaping Hitler's regime. And her granddaughter, my mother, would have been 101 years old today.
It's a wonderful story.
Arthur Berger with the Holocaust Memorial Museum, thank you so much for being with us and sharing this important message.
Well, thank you for covering the story.
You're welcome. Well, tonight we revisit Jason Calvi's story of a Holocaust survivor who won't let the world forget these atrocities.
The Nazis killed some 6 million Jews and many others.
I feel that I owe the world some kind of debt.
Margit Meisner, a native of Austria, escaped.
Ciudades chiquitas.
At 93 years old, she's giving back as a tour guide here at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
We survivors will not be around very much longer.
In 1940, Margit was 18 and living in Paris.
My mother had been arrested by the French and sent away, and I was all by myself in Paris, and the Germans were approaching.
Margit says it's a miracle she found her mother. Together, they fled.
We walked a beautiful, beautiful walk up the mountain on the French side and down the mountain on the Spanish side, but we lost our way and got caught by the police. And eventually they put us into a Spanish jail. We were saved miraculously by a Spanish friend. So lots of miracles made it possible for me to be sitting here.
For the past 9 years, she's been leading tours here.
If we're lucky, they will not stand by when they see injustice.
She herself has seen modern genocides, but Margit says she's encouraged by people trying to help.
That gives me confidence that eventually the good will triumph over the evil.
And so she continues to tell her story of survival 70 years later. In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
That was actually last fall, but Arthur tells me that Margit was at the Holocaust Museum today, again sharing her story. Music will greet Pope Francis when he visits Mexico next month. The Diaz sisters were first asked to play marimbas in churches 3 decades ago, and now they'll play for the papal mass in Cristobal de las Casas on February 15th. Marimbas are similar to xylophones. Their music is traditional in Mexico. For our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and we leave you tonight with circus performers entertaining the Pope today in St. Peter's Square. It brought a huge smile to the face of Pope Francis, who calls them champions of beauty. The Pope went on to say, beauty is good for the soul. Good night. God bless.